Now, I think we ought to have a certain amount of background to the Montessori method if you're going to understand the reasons why we do the things we do. And perhaps one of her first and most important discoveries in working with children, and she made it in the first children's house, but she had already worked as a doctor, a specialist with women and children. She had worked as a specialist with educationally subnormal children and with the physically handicapped before she started her work with the normal children. And her work with the normal children arose because these terrible slums where mainly the criminal class of Rome lived were taken over by a philanthropic group who cleaned out the houses, made decent flats, and relet them to people at a moderate rent. It must have been one of the very early attempts at housing for the people who could not really manage for themselves. And you must read her description of these flats and the neighborhood in the Montessori method, and you will find that she had very advanced ideas on how to help the people. And she really went in as a medical officer. She established a dispensary so that she could help anyone who wasn't well and have them get the medicine on the spot and things like this. But the children of the flats, if you are a thief or a prostitute, you do work all night, and your days are spent in sleeping. So the children of these people did run wild during the daytime, the preschool-age children. And school age in Italy was 7 years at that time, you see. So the children, left free to do whatever they liked, vandalized the buildings. And so in order to stop this vandalization, the people in charge thought of putting one of the flats on the ground floor aside for the use of the children in the daytime. Again, a very new idea. And these flats, naturally being Italian, were built around a courtyard. And so having a ground floor flat for the children, they had access freely to the courtyard and could run in and out, and it was safe because it was an enclosed courtyard. And Dr. Montessori describes the first day when about 70 children were collected into these rooms, and they were put in charge of the porter's daughter, a very nice girl of about 19, eldest of a large family, but that's as much as she knew. And Montessori always said she could never have done her work had a teacher been appointed. It was only because she had this very nice girl who liked children, who was willing to do what she was asked, that she was able to experiment and discover the things that she did. But imagine the first day, the children were most unwilling. They didn't want to be there. A lot of tears and so on. And they were aged 2, 2.5, up to 7. There were many toys, very beautiful toys, because the wealthy women of Rome had given money for this project. They were interested in it. They cared about the welfare of the children, and they gave very expensive, very beautiful toys from their own nurseries. So there was no lack of that type of material. Dr. Montessori, though, gradually began taking in materials that she had been using with the defective children and the ones who suffered from some physical defect. And she began using materials that would help development. And here she was really amazed at the difference in the children she had been dealing with and the normal children. And the differences led her to change her thinking about children, which was the way of thinking that everybody had in those days, and to really watch the children from the point of view of normal development. See, people always thought that children cried a lot, that they clung to their mothers, that they had a very short attention span, that you always had to bribe them with sweets or, something like that. And she was amazed when she found that they, given the right materials, they had these tremendous powers of concentration. She timed one little boy with the cylinders, and he worked for an hour and a half without stopping. Mind you, when they work, they do move. They wriggle on their chairs, they stand up. They're still hardly at all. And their hands are always active. Now, after having worked with the children for a certain time, she brought out this theory that children, from birth to maturity, go through definite stages of development, both physical and mental. In fact, the whole child. There are these very definite stages. And in each stage is completely different to any of the following stages. And that during one of these stages, any of these stages, nature, whatever you like to call it, gears the child towards gaining certain knowledge, developing certain attributes. You see? And the child is given a certain time in which to acquire certain attributes and a definite stage in life. And it's the same for all children. You see? And once that period is over, then the child goes into quite a different stage of development when he has a totally different work to do. See? And the first period is over. Now, if the first period is not well utilized, then the second period cannot take place so well because there's no foundation. See? She divided these periods of development broadly into 3 periods. Birth to 6 years, 6 to 12, 12 to 18. And then she does subdivide them again, but those are the broad stages. You will notice that Piaget takes the same stages. He founded his ideas on hers, and what he has done is to set out to prove really what she said does work. He's interested in proving these steps in intellectual development. He hasn't really, I think, said anything that she hasn't already done, but he is giving you the proofs for all these things. I once asked her where her proofs were, because, you know, lately we've always wanted these experiments proofs. And she said, oh, well, once I knew what happened, nobody wanted to read through all my experiments. I threw those away, you see. And what I did was to tell people what happened. And once I knew what happened, then I said what we now have to do is find out what help should be given, you see. And I think that is where she differs from everyone else. Because having found out what happens, she tells you very clearly, describes the stages and what is acquired at each stage, but that she then tells you how to help development, you see, which is quite a different thing. Well, now, during this course, we're really thinking of the development of up to 5 years of age, 5, 6, that first stage of development. And here she pointed out that at this age, the child is a tremendous worker. He is not a little person who plays all the time and wants a lot of amusement, as we have previously thought. He works very hard, practically from the moment of birth. That child lying there in the cot is doing a tremendous amount of work. And provided he goes through these first 5 years with the right help, and here it is really the parents who are responsible, and in particular the mother, then if the mother does the right thing, father, any other adults involved, by 5, 6 years of age, the child has done and acquired more than he's ever going to do in any comparable 5 years later. He works harder in the first 5, 6 years than at any other time in life. And so we must know what nature intends him to do, we must understand his development, and then we must see that we make life easy for him so that he can develop to his highest potential instead of just managing to get through somehow, often in a very damaged state. And of these 6 years, probably the first year is the most important, and certainly the first 3 years. And those are the 3 years where probably we do the most harm, because we do not understand what is happening. I think today as well there are certain things happening which are worse than previous periods, stages of our development. Very serious things are happening. This child lying in the cradle doesn't only need to be kept clean and fed. Those children who are only kept clean and fed and left lying in that cot by 6 months may be mentally defective, and they can be pulled out of it if they have a one-to-one relationship with one person, but left, they very often die, or they very often end up as defectives. So we have got to really relook at what we are doing with our small babies. It's all right to talk about our rights, but we also have duties. Nobody is talking about our duties. And if you take on another life, you choose to have a baby, then the child's rights supersede your rights, because you have elected to bring this little helpless creature into the world. And you had better to find out before you decide to have a child what it entails. I think a lot of us have a rosy picture of a nice doll to play with, but it's not going to be like that. Well now, when this baby is born, the actual moment of birth is terribly important. And here we are beginning to realize this. The medical world has been very remiss. It has we still treat children as though they were just possessions or tadpoles. We don't give them this feeling they are people in their own right. You see, they have a personality, and so on. And they're very vulnerable. Now, the baby has a struggle to be born, and then when he is born, that's fine. He's got to have a good reception in this world. See, he's got to be treated very gently. Having come from the dark, it isn't good for him to be in a blaze of light. See? It isn't good for him to have a party going on around him. You see, all the animals retire into privacy, a quiet spot, to have their babies alone. They don't have them with a lot of spectators around. You see, there has to be a doctor and a midwife, granted. Well, the baby, when he's born, should be just folded up and not bathed. Dr. Montessori even felt that this mucus covering was a protection against germs at the beginning. Wrapped him up in a clean cloth and at once gave him to his mother. Now we know from the animal world and from noticing children who are taken away from their mothers at birth and put in a room, which has been the practice and still is in many hospitals, put in a room full of babies by themselves, that the babies are terrified. You see, they spend a lot of time screaming, where babies were not meant to be left screaming. But in any case, this is terrifying for them. And the mother doesn't have her baby to hold, and so she doesn't know her own baby. And there are many cases of mothers going home with the wrong baby. Now, how could that happen? See? Now, during the first hours of life, and the time does vary for the different animals. With some it's quite a short time, with some it's a longer time. The mother has the baby, and what we call imprinting takes place. The mother knows the baby knows the mother, and they could never not know each other again. You see? And it's essential that that imprinting takes place. If you have a baby lamb born, and the mother doesn't get it at once, if she has it at once, she always knows her own lamb from all the hundreds of lambs gambling around her, and she will never accept the wrong lamb. But if she doesn't get it at once, it's withheld for an hour or two, she doesn't know it, and she won't accept it. You see? So this is happening with the human mothers. And that mother-child relationship is not taking place and is never the same thing. You see? So in the first hours, the mother must have the baby as soon as possible to hold, and then it is in a cot beside her, so the mother and child do not have this separation. Dr. Montessori said that many children who get this rather rough reception, they're put on cold scales and weighed. Why do you have to weigh a baby? You don't need to know its weight. It's held up by its heels. It's terrified. You see it clenching its little fists. Why should you be held up like that to be measured? There's no need to measure you. You see? It's obvious if a baby needs special care or not. You only have to look at it. No? You don't need to do all those things. And so this rather rough, soulless sort of handling can cause regression. And instead of going forward with courage into life, you've been through a struggle, you're triumphant, you've won, you've got your mother, you're entering a new phase of maturity, you're happy, you go forward courageously, you regress. Now then, nature meant the child to be breastfed. She gave the mother perfect milk. You see, the one and only food that really suits the baby. Any other food gives it wind, gives it tummy pains, and gives you an awful lot of work. Preparing those bottles takes you about an hour to prepare a feed and to sterilize the bottles and so on. I don't know why anybody ever does it. And it's also better for the mother. See, she produces certain glands that makes her quiet and peaceful and happy and not so anxious. And it makes her organs shrink back to normal and all the rest of it. Whatever suits one also suits the other. And the baby gets this right tactile connection with the mother. The mother loves the baby, she pets it, she handles it. She gives it all these signs of human affection without which the child cannot develop. So we cannot have a baby, put it into daycare, and go back to our jobs in 3 or 4 days. See, nobody else can do what the mother should do. And if you want a happy, healthy, intelligent child, then you stay at home and you look after it properly. And all the recent testing just bears this out. The breastfed child, the child who was looked after by a good mother, at a year of age tests as much more intelligent than the child who has been put into daycare or left alone when he cries. Now in this first year of life, the baby goes through certain stages in the development of movement, in the development of speech, in the absorption of his environment, you see, and so on. He accomplishes a great deal by 1 year of age. So there again, he needs to be free. He mustn't be tucked up tightly, he mustn't have restrictive clothing. You'd be better without any clothing, like the little African boy where it's hot enough to go without anything. You see? And he doesn't need to sleep 20 hours a day. You can't develop when you're asleep. You see? So he sleeps and he wakes, and in his waking periods, he moves, he wriggles, his circulation, he moves as much as he's able to. If he's free, he moves a good deal. He kicks, his arms flop about. Movements are not really under the control of the will at first, But all these movements get the circulation going and stimulate the development of the intelligence. And he makes discoveries. His hands flop about, and he finds that every time he hits the bars of his cot that they're hard. Every time his hand comes in contact with the blanket, well, it's rough and woolly. See, so he begins to take in sensations and gradually build up conceptions. And then, if he's a normal baby, probably twice or 3 times a day he will cry. Not because he's hungry, not because he doesn't care if he's wet or not. I mean, he cries for attention from his mother. Now, the terrible thing that's happened today is that people like Skinner say to you, if you pick the baby up and pet it, you will spoil it. Well, the opposite is true. Our instinct is always to go to a crying baby. Any animal goes immediately to its young if there's a cry. See, they wouldn't hesitate for a second. And we have lost our hereditary instinct because we have had these generations of mothers who have left the baby to cry. See, and this is very serious. We have to regain our knowledge, regain our instincts. Because the instincts we have as a mother, really we learned from our own mother in the first year of life. And we as adults are geared to treat the baby the way we were treated. That's why if we had a mother who slapped us, then it's almost impossible for us not to do it. We have to really make ourselves not do it. Or if a man had a father who slapped him, he finds it very hard not to slap his own children. He has to really make a tremendous effort not to, because this was the pattern we learned when we were young. Well, when the baby cries, if we put it in a room or leave it to cry, naturally, after a time, it's going to stop crying. But this gives us perhaps another half hour of peace to do what? You see? But for the baby, development ceases, because it's asking to be picked up and petted. And this petting does give it the human emotions. It's able to love in its turn, and it gives it this courage to learn. You see, all of us learn when somebody encourages us. And it gets talked to, because our instinct, every woman's instinct, is to chatter to her baby, unless she has become over-intellectual. And the over-intellectual mothers don't seem to be able to just loosen up and chatter to their babies in the same way. Or many of them don't. Yeah. And if you really stop and think about it, well, it does seem a little foolish. This baby doesn't even know that language exists. What am I talking to it for? It can't understand me, you see. But if we don't think about that, instinctively, any woman who picks up a baby, and the men don't in the same way, the mothers were meant to be dealing with this first year of life. You see. We chatter to it, we talk nonsense to it, we talk in full sentences to it. You see, we gabble away, and the baby goes through different stages. But as soon as we talk, it stops crying. You see, it's crying because nature is saying to it, you have to learn a language. And you have to learn the language of your environment. It's not born with a language. It has to take the language in which it is born. If it was an American baby and it was being brought up by Chinese people, it would learn Chinese. So it has the power of taking any language, and therefore it starts without a language. And that's the amazing thing about the baby. So for a little while, it likes to be talked to, and almost better still, it likes to be sung to. You see, and you will see the baby responding, and it responds rhythmically to you. It jigs and it rocks and it waves its arms and legs and it smiles. Practically in the first days, people are very rude. They say it's not smiling, it's got wind. Why should it have wind every time you sing to it, you know? It's a definite smile, it's a definite response. And again, you forge this relationship with the baby. So you just chatter, And at one point, the baby just stares at you, this unwinking stare at your mouth. You see, at another stage, it begins putting its hands on your mouth, its hands on your cheeks, feeling the vibrations. At another stage, it begins making all these facial contortions. It lies there without you, moving its lips, putting its tongue in and out. It's a very messy stage. It dribbles and it blows bubbles, you see, but it's getting all the muscular movements of speech. And at another stage, it starts babbling. There are these definite periods which occur at the same time for all babies. You can't hasten the progress, but you can stop it, you see, by not talking to the baby. And when it babbles, I think all babies everywhere babble dead, dead, dead first, you know. It's nice for the English and American parents because they think dead, the baby said dead first, but I believe all babies go through the same syllables. I rather think there's a theory, they babble the sounds of all languages and then later drop the ones that are not in their own. Deaf babies babble, but they, after a time, they give up babbling because they're not getting any response. And by a year, the baby has 1 or 2 words that he does use with intent. And he understands 1 or 2 words. If you have always said spoon to him, and you say spoon, he will often look at the spoon, or he will often pick up the spoon, showing that he has understood. Now from then, there's a very rapid progress. So you may not have realized what was happening up to then, but then comes very rapid progress when the child talks in single words and then 2-word combinations. Mummy come, mummy go, baby biscuit, cat milk. And there are these 2-word combinations, sometimes the 2 words are fused together. And the mother who's been with her child seems able to understand him very well and talks back again. And this is 2-way necessity. You have to talk to your child, but you also have to listen to your child. You see, so that he really practices. And when they're lying in bed by themselves, you can hear them chattering away. You know? And it's quite interesting to take a tape of them and hear what they're saying. They'll sit there saying, baby red, red book, dog this. 2-word sort of sentences. Just practicing language. If the child hears correct speech, now at this time we are inclined to speak to him in simple sentences. You see? And I think that's right, but we ought not to talk the baby talk that used to be talked. You see, a poor child had to be almost bilingual because instead of saying dog to him, you said bow wow, and so on. He will say these baby things, but when you speak to him, speak in complete sentences, but fairly simple sentences. I think we do that instinctively. And then by 2.5, you will find that language is complete, that he's probably got the syntax correct. First syntax isn't, the negative is nearly always put at the beginning of a sentence. You see, and things like this. This is a definite, we can go into a much more detailed study. It's quite fascinating because they do all do the same thing. But by 2.5, they are speaking in full sentences. And syntax is, on the whole, correct, provided they've heard good English. Pronunciation is correct, provided they've heard good pronunciation in the home. A child has the ability to learn more than 1 language in his first year. I don't know what limit, I don't think anyone knows the limit to the number of languages they can learn when they're young. It's very, very good if they can learn 2 languages. But they must learn it, the second language, like the mother tongue. without translating it in their mind. And in an ordinary nursery school, for children who speak well already, it's excellent if you have one person who does nothing but speak a second language, who doesn't speak any English at all. You had someone who spoke Spanish the whole time, just chatted in Spanish, did everything in Spanish. The children didn't know she spoke English. The children would grow up bilingual. I've known children with as many as 4 languages. I think in India they have to have a minimum of 6. It used to be the habit in England to have a French nurse for your baby and then a German governess, so that your children grow up with 3 languages. If you have learned 2 languages, then your vocal cords have adjusted to the sounds of 2 languages, and they seem able afterwards to adjust to more languages. If you haven't, if you have only practiced 1 language, then your vocal cords, the muscles don't seem to be able at a later age to adapt to the pronunciation of another language. Provided you've learned 2 languages, then you seem to be able to. So it's in these first 5 years that it is the best time to add a second language. Well, I've gone rather into the details of language, and the important thing is then that we speak to them in full sentences, that we speak to them a good deal when they're small. When they cry, we pick them up and sing to them and talk to them. When they get to the stage when they begin talking to themselves, that we allow them to talk while we listen, and then we talk, and so on. There has to be this 2-way stream. It's very good for them about 2.5 to mix with their peers in a nursery school for a short time each day, because they get a good deal more practice in language. And in any good Montessori school, there's a good deal of conversation going on. And I'm always saying that, first of all, the children sit, and they sit with a friend, and both children talk at once. And then the next step, you'll find that usually about 3, one is talking and the other is listening. You see, but there's always that stage when they like to be together, but they both chatter simultaneously. Now, our job then is to feed them with words, to use as many words as possible, to use many more words every day, not to worry whether they understand them or not, but just to use language, so that by 5 they have some thousands of words. And the mind has got used to assimilating many, many words. And with each word comes a new idea, you see, and an increase in intelligence. So, without about 5,000 words, you cannot get an education. And if you have spent your time up to 5 really learning language and amassing words, then you can have the power to go on collecting words. But if by 5 you only have a few words, then you have great difficulty in absorbing more words. And one reason why we in the Montessori school like our children to learn to read fairly young, between 4.5 and 6, is because when every book they read uses words which perhaps the parents or the teacher doesn't use. So with every book they get an increase in vocabulary as well as an increase in knowledge. But we must give them books which are well written and which use a great many words. You're going to give them sets of books, and the books that they say proudly, we only use 20 words in these books. Well, what's the use? You see, that's really stultifying them and giving them poor English at the same time. But there are many other things a child does in these first 5 years. See? You might, what else does he do? Now, taking language as the example, what else do you think of him at birth and thinking of him at 5? Yes, movement. Walking is part of it, but he should have perfected movements, the characteristic movements of the human race. And walking is one, but the movements of the hand are what really characterize the human race. I mean, all animals walk, don't they? But we walk on 2 feet, which is more difficult. But we use our hands creatively, you see. So we have to have help in perfecting the use of the hands, so that the hands will obey the will, and he can do anything he wants with his hands. So we have to think of the development of all the movements. Anything else?
Smaller, large muscles develop.
Yes, well, that's movement, isn't it? Yes.
Emotional responses.
Yes, indeed. He's able to make human relationships. Very definitely. That is one of the things he learns. He begins with this relationship with his mother. And if she doesn't relate to him, then by a year of age, he's probably incapable of it, you see. That's what's so serious. I say the mother because the mother is really the one, and the father is important. And the father becomes very much more important when the child turns around 6, and especially they both turn and relate very strongly to the father. But in the first years, it is the mother. Both are important, but the mother who's really there all day. And the father's going out and providing, we hope, if you've chosen well. Mind you do, any of you uncommitted ones. So then, and this give and take with his peers. And even as a baby in a pram, he loves to be next to another baby in a pram. I say a pram, you don't say a pram, you say a baby carriage or something. At all ages, they like the company of their own age, or siblings. See? And so they do develop this relationship with people. That's done up to this 5 years of age. Yes, someone was going to say something.
You were talking about the mother-child relationship. Within the first few hours, the mother, isn't with the child. She'll sort of lose this instinct of,
Yes. Something has to be worked for.
The opposite. What is that? The child-mother relationship. What is the effect of, instead of talking mother to child, child-mother, the child is whisked away, he's not with his mother.
It's very serious. The child often doesn't develop this ability to be loving. You see, he doesn't.
In the first few hours.
I don't know how many hours it is for the humans. It's much longer than for animals. But the first moments are very, very important. The first hours are very important. And you have seen that book, Birth Without Violence, by Le Boyer. Well, Dr. Montessori started this work in the 1940s. 46, she gave a course in London, and she actually lived with us. And she was visiting hospitals, and she was very, very concerned of what was happening. All the attention on hygiene, you see, and the babies being put away from the mothers and so on. We never were quite as extreme as you, but she was really railing against this hygiene, over-hygiene, because you cannot have a hygienic baby, it's impossible. And I mean, and there are more good germs than bad germs, so don't kill them off. And this is what she was talking about. And so she was so concerned with the way the doctors and nurses were treating the babies. So the very last thing she did was to go to Rome and open a clinic where she was teaching the doctors and the midwives the right way to handle the baby. And Le Boyer must have been in touch with this, because he practically follows what she says. And I think many young people are demanding this, and the hospitals are changing. But I was in New Orleans, and I listened to 2 women who had got state funding for a program. They got money, and they went into this hospital where the mothers and babies were separated, and instead of insisting the mothers and babies were together, they gave the mothers a kit to make a face to hang on the baby's cup and things like this. And they went in, And what to me was terrible, they said the mothers were so depressed. Well, you would be, you see. And they went into the baby's room and they took a photograph of each baby and they gave the mother a photograph of her baby. And they said how this cheered the mothers up, that they would look at the photograph and say, oh, is that my baby? I mean, how absurd. I mean, and this was about 3 years ago. It is changing fast. It's changing very fast.
You get a copy of your rights from the United States government, and you have the right to have your baby right down through. Unless you demand that in this area, unless you have a pediatrician or gynecologist assistant, you won't, but you can.
Yes, but it's important we tell mothers how important it is, you see, because there isn't this knowledge.
And if for some reason you can't, for half an hour was unable to, because I was in intensive care. My husband died. You don't have to have a shot or a wait or any of that, but you must demand your rights. That can all happen for your child.
Yes. It's coming fast, isn't it?
It's
Changing
coming
fast.
because mothers are asking. If you don't ask, that won't happen.
But I think that I find there's a big change with the young people. They are going back to breastfeeding, so on, but they must go back to staying at home with the baby.
I have a question on adoption. If you have adoption of a baby, but you have missed, of course, the bonding process and the reception, unable to handle the reception of the child, what can be done to counteract some of the rejection feelings that obviously happen with the child the first few months or weeks?
Well, I mean, you've got to accept that certain things have happened and you can't wash out the past. And you do your best from there. And the child's very lucky to be wanted and to have a home with somebody who really wants him. It's far, far better to be adopted than to be brought up in any form of an orphanage. So at whatever age you adopt, you do give the child a better chance from then on.
I'm an adopted parent. One of mine is adopted him. We adopted him when he was 2 months old, and he was just starved for affection. And it took lots and lots and lots of holding before he started to respond in any way to his environment.
You see, you can make up for a lot.
You can breastfeed if you adopt also. You prepare ahead of time.
That I don't know.
I agree with you totally on the mother-child relationship, but I also feel that the more that the father, my husband was the first to get my son, and it did more, I mean, it did very much for me to have him, but it did so much more for my husband. But that relationship, I know that bond is much more stronger now than it ever would have ever been before. If he wasn't.
Oh, believe me, I'm not, I really do think the fathers have a big role to play, you see, but they can't take over our role, is what I'm saying. Oh no. And to grow up without a father must be absolutely dreadful. I can't imagine it. No. It does take two of you. And it fuses the whole family, doesn't it?
Yeah, I just mean in those first few moments. I mean,
Oh yes, I do. I think it is important. If it can be, yes, I do agree there. I think it's terribly important that you're both there and you both have that baby to hold, to share. Yes. All right then. Well, there is language, it's social relationships, it's movement, it's taking in a great deal of knowledge. A tremendous amount happens in these first 5 years. And they are the most important 5 years in life, and they're the time when the child achieves more than he's ever going to achieve in any later 5 years. So we've got to know what happens, and then we've got to know the right way to help. And we know that the importance of language, then we know to talk to him, we know to sing to him, and we need to listen to him when he talks back again, to let him have social company of his own age, and we know to speak in full sentences with a good grammar, and to introduce many, many words all the time, so that his mind expands and he has a very rich vocabulary by the time he's 5. And we know, if possible, to give him 2 languages. All right? So we have a short rest now, and then